Hello, everybody. It's December. No, it's not December anymore. It's January 9th of 2022. I'm older, and we're all here discussing Volume 1. Now, I've been talking about Volume 1. Today was the last recorded episode of the chapters of Volume 1 for No Killing Goblins. And I've just been, looking at all of the pieces that have been put together that were cool and not cool and were the source of characterization for certain characters for throughout 8 volumes of written works from Pirateaba. They've both been in shock and awe at Pirates' prescience and the ability to build things and their sureness when it comes to characterization, and then shock and awe of the horrific pieces of filth that were left over because Pirate didn't fucking do continuity checks, because that's not something we do. So I decided today is a day where I would just have a bunch of people come up and we would have a discussion all about it and see what we liked and what we didn't like, especially because Pirate has promised us a complete rewrite. Probably not a complete rewrite, because I don't think they have the skills for that. But at least a rewrite of Volume 1 so that it's more palatable for the new readers out there. I didn't have a plan for today as far as how to structure it or anything. I just wanted to have a chat between people. And for me, the most significant bit about Volume 1 that I'm starting to remember, having read through all of this, it ends abruptly in an exciting place for people who were I don't know if I'm saying this right. Volume 1 should be one complete story, and it doesn't really feel like that. Is that just me? For me personally, it felt like Volume 1 was this odd episodic, like half story, half novel, hidden in between all of these things, with lots of emotional setups and all these little stories. Like, Ryoka had her own novel, Erin had her own novel. Everyone seemed to just be passing by each other. It wasn't necessarily cogently done, and it wasn't necessarily bad either. It just yeah.
I've got an opinion a little bit about that. Ryoka and Erin both got sort of dropped into the world, and everything that happened to them was you just, there's not really a beginning, because you yourself are the interrupter. So you don't have any backstory on where you are or the politics or anything like that. You got to learn it as you go. And the story feels like that to me. We literally get dropped in with them and have to learn things as we go. And the world doesn't stop for our and wait for us to catch up. The world doesn't go, okay, we'll just put everything on pause until you understand everything that's going on. That's what this feels like to me.
I wasn't necessarily talking about world building.
No, but as a reader, I felt like Erin and Ryoka, like I got dropped into the middle of something and I don't understand most of what's going on, and that made the two main characters, who I admit are not as relatable in the beginning, it meant that I had another thread to them because I was just as lost and just as confused and trying to figure things out with them. That made things a little bit more relatable for me, because neither one of their personalities in book 1 I resonated with. But that's
and their personalities. Okay, I'll get back to the personalities and characterizations.
Yeah. I was just saying that's one thread of commonality that I found when I was missing so many other threads that I expected to find. So.
But the thing about how the plot is, it didn't really feel like there was. Okay, let me take a step back. Pirate was writing for themselves. It felt like they knew what the plot was, they knew where things were going, but we didn't. So we got splash pages instead, and there was an internal story developing of Aaron sort of tiptoeing into the world and discovering these pieces and stuff, but the pieces were always not well, like, it was well thought out in how it was presented from Aaron's POV, but it wasn't. There's no way to say this. It just wasn't always well written. It was well structured, but not well written. If that makes a difference. Does anyone know what I'm talking about when I say that?
Yeah. Kynan says it definitely ends on a cliffhanger / to be continued, but it was tight in a way that the sprawling expanse of current volumes isn't.
Rosie,
Devo says, do we know whether or not there will be a revision of the audiobook then? And, well, my response on that one is probably.
Rosie,
But
you had a comment?
Just to go back to what you were saying, like, especially for me revisiting just like today and yesterday, the beginning parts of book one, I think part of that is how inconsistent the information feels. It almost feels like a different world from the beginning to where we are now. And I think tightening up a lot of that writing, things that Pirate was clearly deciding in the moment and like wasn't completely set on, I think that'll really help with the structure of the piece and can help it feel more like we're part of this world, because it definitely, right now, the writing feels all over the place, and I think that part of that is just Pirate was having to make decisions about the world of everything from like currency to the writing situation, things that haven't necessarily been completely continued or mentioned upon. Like, did you know in the beginning that there was apparently every city has a different currency? I didn't.
Oh yeah. I talk about it in No Killing Goblins. There's a whole thing about how the North has a specific currency and how these cities are part of this alliance that never gets mentioned ever again. It's because because Pirate develops the nobles of the North, and there's not going to be an alliance of cities because nobles are the ones who are in charge of various cities. Like, decisions like that come later, but there isn't a consistency between Volume 1 and excuse me, Volume 1 and Volume 2, 3, 4. Volume 2 and 3 felt more assured in terms of world building versus Volume 1 did. And that consistency is important because Volume 1 is shorter, because Volume 1 is meant to be more thoroughly constructed, because it does lead from an event, a very cool event, which is Erin's sudden arrival, her gaining of the class, her meeting the various Liskorian players, and then experiencing what it means to be lost in another world and to choose the path that she's going to take in that world. And to exemplify that in the simple chapters that came up, I think I've espoused this so many times, but I love the chapter where Aaron goes off into the wilderness and falls into a shield spider nest and then ends up like killing all of the shield spiders and burning them to death, and then has to stand there watching them burn, and Ghazi comes by and is like, "Murder, good! It's great! You're a good person for murdering." And then she's like, "I don't want to be that. I don't want to do that. I don't feel like I don't want to be that."
Just because you're good at something doesn't mean it is who you are.
Yeah, and those are the kind of moments that I wish were more noticeable, and a lot of times they get swamped over by the snarky chess chapters and the oh my god, Olisum is so obsequious and kind of like annoying in the first book on a level that's even later he's never this annoying. Was that just me? Did anyone else find like what were the things that people didn't like about it? What were the annoying parts of it? We'll get to the good stuff later because
the writing, the script, the Lissam's signage that she couldn't read, and yet she could read the signs on the inn that she painted over, and the not dichotomy. Crap, there's another word and I can't think of it. I'm sorry, brain not worky. I don't like how the writing itself. Yes, Lissam we needed a conflict with Lissam in order to get that whole thing going with the chess. But I don't like how it's never really used again, that she can from then on read all the other things that people write.
It was very fast. But Jake665 says, Ryoka at the beginning took me a while before I was 100% on board with her. I'm not talking about whether you enjoyed a certain character and what they were like. Oftentimes that's a sign of writing because you're not meant to love them or you're meant to find them in a certain way. I meant more from an objective perspective. When you look at Volume 1, what just felt not good in comparison to where things are now in Volume 8?
Kermit says that he thought the different currencies in Volume 1 were more realistic than a universal currency that shows up later. As he recalls, monetary policy and the relative purity of coins is a big deal. He then says, I've tried to show Volume 1 to people before, and they felt that the monster attacks were a turnoff.
Wouldn't Kermit expand on that for us? What do you mean by the monster attacks were a turnoff?
Okay, so I've just tried to show people that before, and maybe they just weren't into the whole fantasy genre or RPG conventions and things. But the people I tried to show it to are very much concerned about social stuff, and then they're looking at like the Razorbeak attacks or just basically anything about shield spiders or anything, and they're going, "What? Why is that happening?" And we're I guess familiar. It's a conceit to us that you're living in a fantasy world that's a fundamentally hostile environment with all sorts of nasty plants and animals and things, but that was just something that they weren't familiar with. So
because in fantasy worlds, oftentimes what we get is not monster attacks. I don't understand. Are these people? Have they never read a fantasy novel before? Sorry.
Oh, they do. It's just that for them, the what people do is what makes the world go around.
What do you mean by what people do? Like the jobs or something? I don't.
Well, it's just like the decisions that people make. They're used to thinking of the world as being like there's,
civilized
sentient beings, humans at the top, and then the environment doesn't fight back anywhere near as hard in that real world as it does in one of these fantasy environments. I don't know. It's just a different perspective. They really like the Naomi Novik, Her Majesty's Dragon, or whatever.
Yeah, but even there, it's pretty fucking severe. The kind of pushback they get. All right, Mr. Europe, you had something to say regarding Kermit?
Yeah, just that doesn't feel like a problem with Volume 1. That just feels like a problem with the entire series in that case. Like
I mean, I wasn't able to convince them to keep reading for that reason, but that's
also
just something.
Side note, Naomi Novak, like literally the entire plot of that is having monsters fight each other.
Exactly.
I know, but this is the reaction that I got.
I have a difficult.
No, it was structured around a civilized. You had an army. You had a rules of engagement kind of thing. There's a structure to the fighting that doesn't happen with adventurers and monster attacks. So what they expected is not what they got.
Question about Naomi Novak. It was Napoleonic Wars. It's based on, right? I didn't read that. Yeah. I was reluctant to read that series because I read 2 of her books. I love the Spinning Silver, but what I hated was the kidnapping trope. You kidnap like a girl and then you fall in love with her.
Spinning Silver is what the story is based on, right?
It's a fairy tale.
Yeah, there had to be a kidnapping at some point, Ali.
What is the other story? I didn't mind it by itself, but when I read the other book and it has the exact same trope, the one with the witches and the dragon, what was it called?
Well, that one again, it's Russian fairy tales, and Russian fairy tales have a lot of kidnapping. So I don't know what to tell you. Like that's the way it works.
Okay, but that's also not what we're talking about tonight either. We're not.
Sorry.
Yeah. So. Okay.
How about favorite scenes? Favorite scenes from book 1? Does anybody have just an absolutely?
I didn't want to move on to favorite scenes right away. The reason I was focusing so much on like objective things that were difficult to process or things that didn't work is because what didn't work oftentimes is informed by what did work. what I'm trying. So, for example, we have objections about, like, you mentioned the writing, the learning the Drake script so quickly, the monetary policy being a little strange, the just those kind of little details that you guys are noticing, they're world building aspects. So what I'm hearing a lot from people's objections is that they dislike the world building and the not so granular nature of it, and it's the holes in that world building. Mr. Europe, you had something to say?
Yeah, just the continuity and the world building stuff, or the holes in it, so to speak, are the big things. Obviously, the things that need rewriting. But yeah.
So if you felt that the world building was the weakness of Volume 1, what did you feel highlighted that? What made you focus on?
Like, that's more apparent the more the story goes on. Like, the really, like, it doesn't matter so much if you have, like, obviously the learning the Drake script is like so fast is one thing, but that's entirely dropped later in the story for, kind of obvious. I assume that Pirate didn't want to make every race have their own writing and just have everything be more confusing and muddled that way. Just wanted to make the whole world the story. But obviously, those are the things that need rewriting because it's been kind of been retconned. But the whatchamacallit, like the big things that are sorry, the things that I personally feel are weaker that aren't continuity errors is more like the just the writing and sometimes the pacing of it.
Okay. So what about the pacing felt off? I have my own personal I talked about my own personal opinions on the weakness of the writing, but what about the pacing felt off to you? I'll let you
Personally,
go ahead.
no, it's just it's so hard to put into words because obviously I'm not an author myself, but
No, but you have a feel for it. There's something about the way you read something, and oftentimes it can leave its own impression. Like I talked about today when I was talking about the end of this volume, I felt like I didn't really enjoy the very last chapter of this volume at all, of volume 1. And I kind of felt like it focused so much on the exact point of ending. I'm trying to avoid spoilers. I don't know who for. So the volume ends on the phone call, and Pirate does that thing where she almost walks into the Wandering Inn, but doesn't walk into the Wandering Inn. But then she gets a phone call, so like misdirection coolness thing, and you kind of get super excited and you want to read the next chapter. But in the process, what Pirate does is neatly de-emphasize the power of the actual phone call itself, which is the first interlude that starts off volume 2. And it's a really interesting trick looking at it from an overall perspective, but as an end of volume, it's not great. It doesn't fulfill that satisfied, it's the end of a volume it's the end of a book kind of deal, right?
And that's kind of where I was going with mine. You get dropped into the middle of something and you have no idea what's going on, and it never stops. There's almost never a conclusion to any line. The threads just get divided thinner and thinner and spread out farther and farther until by the time you get, 5 or 6 volumes down, you've got a world view as a reader that you're hoping things end up okay eventually at some point, but there's no guarantee about that because that's not the way actual history works. Sometimes things just don't resolve, and sometimes things never. I like that because I've never seen that in fantasy before.
There's no third act.
But right, there's no third act. There's just it's a Scheherazade story,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
There's
Exactly.
over and it keeps going and going and going and go, and that's what life is.
One
That's
story
exactly
within
what life
another
is.
story within another story. Yeah,
Yes.
it's it's a choice in how to tell a story, but it doesn't necessarily hook people in. Descanter, you wanted to say something about the phone call at the end of the volume?
Yeah, so I had the opposite reaction to you about what was emphasized and what wasn't. I thought that it emphasized the phone call and de-emphasized all of Ryoka's stuff and the things leading up to it. It made all of that feel much less important.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
that's what I'm
you,
saying.
You were saying it emphasized it de-emphasized the phone call, and I'm saying it raised up the phone call more.
No, I was trying to say that the phone call was the focus of it, and everything else just kind of passed by. And once you were done with the phone call, very quickly, the actual interlude was missed out on, because right after the phone call is also the point where Ryoka is supposed to meet Eren. So you're like, what the fuck is this phone call? What does it matter? Who are these people? Why do I care? Let's go meet Eren and Ryoka together, right? That became.
But isn't
No, I'm saying that it made me feel like Eren and Ryoka meeting and so forth were all less important because this world-shaking thing just happened, which is bigger than that. And I think that that's not something unique to Volume 1. I actually think that that's something that Pirate's done a lot of, including even more recently, is have chapters that are full of a lot of interpersonal things and a lot of this and a lot of that, and then there's one or two things that rise up and kind of take over all of the emotional significance
overshadow it
of a chapter and kind of make you not think about 95% of what just went on over now the last 20 or 30,000 words, but in this case the whole sequence. So I think that's I don't think that's a thing that was unique to Volume 1. I think that was actually a pattern that has come up a lot over the whole course of the Wandering Inn.
I'm not sure that always serves Pirate well, especially when looking at the structure of things.
I'm not saying that is. I'm not passing a judgment on it, and I actually agree with you that that can irk me sometimes about the series. I'm saying that it happens more than I'm saying good or bad.
But going back to what Lynette said about the Scheherazade type of structure to the story, where each story opens up another and it creates this
new threads.
No. There's a word for it where the deeper you look, the bigger it is on the inside. God damn it.
TARDIS?
TARDIS.
Yeah, not the TARDIS.
Come on.
No, it's not the TARDIS.
We want to compare Papa's brain to the TARDIS. Come on.
No, it's. Well, I'll think of it sometime. But that process of creating a story in that way it lends itself to the web serial format, but it doesn't really lend itself to translating it into books, because books tend to, at least Western books,
end.
No, it's not that they end. It's that they follow a act structure that's been going on forever. I mean, since Shakespeare, pre-Shakespeare, way back. If you find the foundations of modern literature, or at least modern American literature, there's going to be at least a 3-act play somewhere, and it's always you introduce everybody, show everybody the different players and what the fuck's going on. Then you have some kind of conflict, and the conflict rises, and then the conflict resolves, and everything declines. Then you have an ending, quote unquote, that can be, ambiguous or unambiguous or whatever the fuck you want it, but it's always that 3-act play, and that is missing it's internally done within chapters specifically, but I don't think that happens necessarily across the length of the volume, at least not Volume 1. What is the 3 acts? 3 acts, if there was one in Volume 1? And Jake665 asks, but is it needed? And my thing is, yes, it is. For the first volume in a series, you want to get somebody to the point where they feel satisfied enough to keep going. After that, you can Scheherazade all you want, but you gotta catch them first.
Well, I got that though. I mean, I did feel satisfied. Ryoka went to the blood fields and she had her epiphanies and she started making some soul-searching choices and resolutions, and Aaron decided to make friends and go out and explore a little bit and I got all of that. I was happy with how we were starting to settle into the world. That was my resolution to all of it. And then the phone rang.
That didn't feel like a resolution to me. That just felt like the culmination of here's a conflict Ryoko has to face, and she resolves the conflict, and then we go halfway through another story, and then she never makes it because she's never there for the actual, like, we start another story, and in that story, the beginning of the story is the conflict with Skinner and the death of the chess club and the death of the horns and what happens. That's the beginning of the story in within the 3-act structure is how I was looking at it. So the end of volume 1 isn't a climax, it's literally the beginning of a story. So you have what's essentially a weird kind of prologue before you have the giant explosion that's the source of the beginning of a story. Because if you source backwards through all of the volumes, that conflict right there, when Kissinger fails to bring people out and Liskor experiences the undead assault, and Torin starts leveling up, and Pisces and all these characters are involved in this assault. That right there is the origin of the majority of the Wandering Inn, and that story is like most of volume 1 is a prologue to that.
Yeah, that doesn't mean we didn't feel a resolution of some sort. Erin actually, got herself together and she helped fight off, and she stood up for, okay, Rat says just now, Erin becomes a quote unquote successful innkeeper, but everyone dies. And Edge says that he feels like it definitely happens in volume 1. Climax happens with Skinner. There's an extended epilogue that isn't labeled epilogue, sure, but definitely feels like there's a narrative structure. Erin survives. Erin starts the innkeep. Erin has an adventuring team stay at her inn. Death.
Jake665 says, Act 1, Erin enters and then names the inn, introduces the majority of the important people. Act 2, Ryoka intro and the horns enter Liskor, introduces more. That's a lot of introduction. That's 2 introductions. That's 2 different acts where you're effectively replicating the essential beginning of a 3-act structure. Act 3 is dungeon resolution. Dungeon arc with horns and Ryoka. Again, they're entering. They're beginning something. All of volume 1 is they're beginning something. Internally within each story, there is something of an arc. Erin appears at the inn. She gets hurt. She's helped. Then, and then the end of that little arc is essentially when a new arc within that arc, and it's like, wait a minute, when Kilbakich dies to the goblins defending Erin, and Kissenberg's appearance, and then Pawn's thing. Each of that was a Scheherazading moment. It's just, yes, and DM Craft keeps poking at us and saying that, remember, this is 3 book lengths. I understand it's 3 book lengths, but even for me, for a 3 book length thing, it's still awkward. It's still very awkward the way it's struck. I don't know. At least
can we talk?
Go ahead.
Can we talk about things we liked now? It's been half an hour.
I'm not, talking about the critiquing something is not a negative. It's oftentimes not a frustration. I'm going to say this right now before we start. Just because I'm critiquing something and encouraging other people to critique something, it isn't a bad thing. It makes you think about the story that you're reading, and it makes you appreciate every aspect of it. I don't feel bad saying any of this.
Yeah, but I'm also getting the feeling that when I say that I felt resolution, you're telling me I'm wrong.
No, I'm not telling you you're wrong. You felt resolution. That's your feeling for the book. And I'm talking about that resolution didn't seem to me as structurally as significant. When you say you felt the resolution, you created that resolution based on a character arc. Yes? That was the
end. My resolutions do tend to be emotional. Yes.
Yeah, so they're emotional, character arcs. and that makes sense to me. But those are emotional character arcs, not necessarily structural resolutions within that 3-act structure that I was talking about.
Okay.
Okay, that's all I'm just responding to what you said. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going to disagree with it, but it makes I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah. Rosie wanted to say something, and then yes, we can move on to the positive stuff if you. I don't understand why people think that critique is whatever. Go on, Rosie.
Well, just to hop in, I'm going to try to articulate the best, but I think it's actually extremely fitting to the story. I do agree some of the acts, maybe acts or arcs, or however you want to put it, can maybe be a bit more succinctly put together with a bit more resolution to them individually within book one. But I think at the ending, this whole point of all of it coming together of Ryoka's story and Erin's story colliding with Ryoka to the end, and then that being interrupted by the phone call with the other Earthers is, I think, extremely fitting for how the rest of the story goes. The ways the Earthers have interrupted all of these other things that are going on around the world. And I think it also introduces to us this idea that not only is the world much bigger than we expected, not only are Earthers having much farther reaching conflicts and situations that are affecting the world than we expected, but also a lot of the times the resolution we're aiming for isn't necessarily actually any kind of a resolution. And I think, that's, to me, fulfills a huge part of expectations for the story. That you're not going to get a nice, neat bow on the ending. And maybe that is a little off-putting for people as the first volume. But I think if the first volume had a super nice bow at the end, you would be disappointed by the rest of the volumes and the way the story just spirals out. So I think it's spiraling out the end of the first volume is good and actually tells you what to expect, rather than setting up a false expectation for the way this story is going to go.
What are you asking, Lynette?
I was going to go back and read the people we've missed saying, since this is the reaction comment.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, Ali says, you got to take into account the nature of the publishing. The story didn't start as a published book. It's a web series. It follows a different structure. It's not a book, at least not at the start. Brack says, split perspective without a real tie between characters, yet beyond from Earth, felt disjointed. I don't mind that kind of storytelling, especially when you can expect the characters to meet up, but I can see how it would bother people. Ali says that there are many storylines that are introduced. Disc Rhythm and Brew says, I like the prologue-ish exploration nature of Volume 1 a lot. It's most of why I kept reading. Packrat says, from what I recall, I really liked the last stands and fighting of Volume 1, Skinner, the introduction of aberrations, the badassery with the goblins. In my opinion, it had a good mix of both slice of life and great big battles. I didn't like the slow prologue, though. Okay, caught up.
Can I talk about what I liked in Volume 1?
Sure.
So, and this is in comparison to other volumes, but I felt the world was a lot bigger in Volume 1. There are a lot of things, there are a lot of continents, mysteries. In subsequent volumes, especially in the later ones, the world is way smaller, it feels. I think because of, the television, because of the messaging system, because of all these, we find out that the mage system is basically the same everywhere. Wisdom controls all these things. It felt that the world is smaller, and I don't know. I like how big the world felt in Volume 1. It's just a small city on a one continent, and you had all these other factors going in, which felt more fantastical than the later volumes, which felt more like our worlds in a sense.
Kermit says, I loved the Immortal Game and when Aaron sang to Pawn after the interrogation. Got goosebumps.
Mr. Europe wanted to say more good things.
Yeah, I agree with that, with what Ali said. I also have to say that I think I'm in the minority, but I really loved Ryoka in Volume 1. I think that was the best version. No, I thought, honestly, she was one of my characters in the first and even second volume.
Heresy! I'm kidding. Honestly, what sticks out most in my mind, what I liked the best, was the banter between the guardsmen. I loved Relk and Kilbakich as they went back and forth with each other and stop kicking me. And yeah, I loved the connections that the characters make with each other and how they deal with each other and how they don't deal with each other sometimes, I guess.
Cal, you have some good stuff to say?
I do. How's my volume?
You're
Okay.
good.
Okay. One of the things that I've always appreciated about Volume 1 is that Pirate doesn't really stint on like the ugly stuff. Like Erin getting the shit kicked out of her, being in danger of starving to death, like being Erin, she's practically in danger of tripping over a rock and breaking her neck. But like stuff like the flatfish and cutting her hand open and all of that, and then one of
Periods.
yes, one of my favorite scenes I think in the entire serial is that moment where she goes into town finally and she's talking to Kershaya, and trying to explain about human periods. And the line about how the children nearby looked equally odd and grossed out. And like that was the beginning of the legend right there.
Not to mention the first time she meets the other human adventurers and then immediately starts punching them because they're assholes.
Yep.
Yep, and I like that she swears a little bit more in this volume than she does in
In
a lot of
any
other
other.
volumes.
Yeah.
But she's also like it shows a lot of her character. It establishes her beautifully, I think. Like she will always get her ass back up and she will go and do the dirty work that she has to survive. But and you already discussed the moment with the shield spider pit where she's just like, I may be good at it, but I don't want to do that. That's not who I want to be. And that echoes through the entire rest of the serial.
Anyone else? So we have Ed Shancer saying, I didn't like Ryoka in Volume 1. I like reading about Ryoka in Volume 1. One thing I especially liked was the use of color to represent Ryoka's internal thought processes, sometimes even showing what in my opinion seemed to be intrusive thoughts. Mr. Europe quotes the specific line about how Ryoka had a pink thought about how hot what's his face was. What's his face?
Calruse.
Calruse, there we go. Jake665 says, flipping the chessboard while Aaron was alone in the inn after beating Olsum. That single moment cemented me with this story. And Discanter, you have stuff to say.
Yep. So a little bit of expansion about what I was saying earlier that I liked the like an exploring thing is that I thought it did a very good job of saying here's this kind of strange place, and I felt like Volume 1 was full of learning about new and interesting things, and I thought that was just really fun to go through, and it's one of my favorite things to do about any sort of new world or activity or kind of thing. And so I thought that was really enjoyable to wander through with Aaron and go, here's this weird place. What does this do? What does that do? Ah, these are shield spiders. How does money work? Hey, they have chess here too. That's kind of strange. So all this just basic learning I thought was one of the strongest, happiest things about the whole volume. I don't think there's anything else that really trumps that.
I think my biggest enjoyment out of Volume 1, mostly because I like them in the first place and I will always appreciate them quite a bit more, is the introduction of the chess club and the inevitable outgrowth from the chess club of Bird and Pawn. And my personal feeling has always been that Night was a tragedy. I know Pirate had to do it, kill off a possible significant character, but the loss of the chess club and what they could have represented and what they could have been, it really cut me. Like, it was a good kind of cut, the kind of grief that you want to feel, where you're like, oh, I don't know if this is like the same for everybody, but there are entire books that are designed to make you weep, like just to make you sad and get you to feel that kind of grief, and then you just sort of let it out, and in the process it kind of makes you satisfied. And yeah, a good tragedy requires catharsis, and that was a good like moment of catharsis, because what was left over, Pawn and Belgrade and Bird, was the basis of the rest of the outgrowth of the Antinium, and I truly love the Antinium story.
Bees, it was adorable.
I'm gonna start singing soon, because unless somebody has something to say.
Oh, we can't have that.
I'm
One
like,
of the questions for tonight's discussion topic post was what feels like it doesn't fit anymore. If we're going to actually have a rewrite and Pirate's going to go back over some stuff, are there things that don't feel like they go anymore?
When Kilbakech and Relk first talk to her, and they talk about, the gods are dead, and there used to be clerks and paladins, and
Well,
did we talk about this?
yeah. Well, I mean, the continuity part, yes, because we're obviously going to have to go back and change some things. The fact that like Celis didn't know who Magnolia was and that kind of thing. But if you're going to be having scenes, let's say a scene that doesn't feel like it fits anymore. Did anybody find that there was something that just now
the
feels completely out of place?
awkward characterization from like Celis, the person, is well represented, but her there's this weird thing where Lescore has a narrative, like it just answers to the narrative about how much it knows about the surrounding area. Sometimes it's like Lescore doesn't even know anybody else exists, and sometimes it's like Lescore knows everybody exists. So somehow the messenger from Lady Magnolia Reinhardt went all the way through Lescore's lands. Nobody noticed their presence. Nobody knew anything. Arrives at Lescore and is completely ignored as some noble ladies. And even, like, I don't care how much racism there is. I don't care how much bullshit there is. Stupidity is not something that I will ever accept as reasonable, an excuse for being bad at basic things. Like, you can't not have a place to receive important messengers, and you can't have obsequious merchants in charge of a city if those obsequious merchants are also getting reports from strategists and from their watch captain telling them all about stuff that happens all over the north, and yet somehow they don't know who Magnolia Reinhardt is. Anyway, Mr. Yerk got something to say.
Yeah, specifically the scene where Saria talks to the adventurers, and I don't remember who it is. If it's which one of the Horns of Hammerhead it is, but one of them doesn't like recognize the name Floss, and
Oh my god, I forgot about that. Yeah.
yeah, and stuff like that. It's part of what we were talking about before, that the world seemed kind of bigger, but also the people seemed horrifically uneducated and ignorant about everything.
Which fair, because it wouldn't make sense if Lescore was as undereducated and like
Did?
not underfunded, just non-knowledgeable about their own region and about their own history. Like, a lot of the stuff I'm objecting to is it only happened 10 or 15 years ago, and these were prominent figures, and everybody forgot they existed. in the city that just fought about it and has an high on, like, jeez, no. I'm still
like
Go ahead.
the feeling I had from Liskar in the first book was that it was like an isolated border town.
Right.
It's far away from everyone. But then we see it's like, no, it's literally in the middle
It's
of all
literally
these
in the
events.
middle of everything, and it was isolated on purpose. Like, fuck. Just it doesn't square well with the way things are represented. So, Action Kermit says the hive mind of the chess club has wild implications. It implies that all Israel Antinium are true Antinium, and the queens just can't connect with them. Yeah, that thing I think is one of the most egregious moments in Volume 1 that everybody knows just does not make sense. The fact the pirate has
I like to kind of defend that moment at least a little bit. I'm sure if Quill was here, he would
Dragonist
on
says the
I'm full
exact
of
same
shit,
thing. Go on, girl, go.
Mainly that I think at that point Pawn was already Pawn, right?
He was, he had established his individuality, yes.
So my thing is that, and of course it's all theory unless it's rewritten to make things clearer or to prove that I'm full of shit, but my thing is that he was the very first of the individuals. That was an indication of his ability to form that link the same way that we see Belgrade and Anand do it in Esthelm in Volume 3, where they're commanding people with the mind-to-mind thing and not needing Kilb or a queen to do it for them. Like, Pawn is the first. Pawn is the sort of the greatest. All the other surviving individuals accord him the highest respect and treat him as like first among equals sort of thing. And that's the best I can come up with, is that was him from pretty much the very beginning showing that he is true Antinium.
So Edgedancer,
I thought the first one died. The very first one, the one that goes to Kilbakech, Kilbakech takes him to the inn. I thought that person, like that first, like Pawn is the first one who talks to Aaron. There was one before him. Like he goes to Kilbakech, said, "Can we go back to the inn?"
He was the best one at chess, but he was never given a name, I don't think.
He was never given a name.
So he was never fully individual as far as like the text indicates.
So Edgedancer's question pretty much wraps this up for me. Are there any major objections besides continuity or backstory developing? Feels like those are the only major things I'm hearing, just in different ways. And I tend to agree. There hasn't really been any kind of significance other than differences in continuity, backstory, and the structure, except for my harping on about 3-act structures.
I think just the feel of the story changes from the first volume to the again, small world, big world, but also how disconnected Liskar is, which is also kind of related to that. I don't know. The story felt different. It felt less. It was more of a slice of life than an epic story. It's which in the later volume. I don't know. That's like a legitimate criticism.
From a character POV, it's stayed consistent, but yeah, the story was definitely not in that level of scope. So I'm going to end the recording here, unless if anybody has some final thoughts, just go ahead and post. We'll give a few minutes for people to think it over. If they have anything they want specifically to say to Pirates, for example, or just in accordance with Volume 1, no limits on what you can say. Go ahead. Just type it away. Go ahead, Rosie.
Yeah, I mean, I would just want to say that if Pirate's listening, I think honestly the majority of Volume 1 is fine, and that once you go through and the language kind of matches what we've got going on now, and the characters, obviously they change over time, but are a little bit more consistent to what we have now. And all those inconsistency details are, for the most part, cleaned up or cleared up. I really think it'll be a super solid entry into the world. And I think there's really not much that needs to be added or taken away from, because those slice of life moments, because those people interactions are so crucial to what drew people in the first place. And that's really just, once you get towards the end of the where we are now, and you look back, is when you go, wow, this started out with a lot of stuff that didn't happen and is weird. But overall, I think it's still, at its bones, a really good first volume.
Okay. Okay. Edge Dancer says Volume 1 drew all these people currently reading TWI in here. Just because some parts of Volume 1 have been outgrown doesn't mean that there isn't value, and Volume 1 isn't great, just that perspective is necessary. And we have another ping from Shining Spanner. Go ahead.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Sorry, I'm on my phone. Yeah, no, I agree with Rosie for the most part. The story kind of grew legs and got away from itself, but Volume 1 is inherently the introduction to this world. And now that it's grown into what it is, yeah, you don't have to rewrite it as much as potentially some people are thinking, but if it brings it into line and makes it a more, what's the word, like a streamlined read, which allows the rest of the story to flourish off it, then it can only help in the long run, really. I think, anyway. That's it.
Okay. I don't see anybody else, so we'll just wrap it up.
Oh, there might be a comment coming from Edarin.
Ooh.
Also, I said I fully expect it to at least double in size with descriptions and expanded scenes and stuff.
I don't know about that. Pirates.
That's in part Oshi just teasing because of how long each volume has gotten as we go on.
No, that's true. I just want the book to be. I want it to be a book, and then for everything else, the fuck they want. Work started when Aaron went to a pox on all your houses. So